Okay, so let's do a little bit of review of yesterday. And yes, Spencer, I do still own that blue suit. So somewhere in there, I never put it on. All right, so um, let's get started. What does HTML stand for, everybody?
Hypertext markup language.
Right? Okay. And how do we create an HTML file?
.html.
.html. So the name of the file, we would normally call it index, and then we say .html. And what are some characteristics of an HTML file? What some things you always have to have?
Head and body.
A head and a body, right? And those are encapsulated in what?
.html.
An HTML tag. Yep. Okay, so what usually goes in the head?
Meta.
A what?
Meta.
Meta tags.
Meta tags. Okay, what are the, and we didn't discuss that in detail, but let's try to answer that. What are the meta tags for?
They provide data about the page and for the browser to use while it's reading the code, like what
Yes.
your character set is and stuff like that.
Yes, so the metadata is for the scaling of the view, trying to make it compatible for all different browsers. Okay, what are some other properties that go inside the head?
Style sheets.
Right. Okay. That's true, but we haven't got to that yet. So what is the other thing that goes inside the head?
The title.
Yes, the title. The title is going to be that section at the top. So in my case, I'm looking at the title of this page it's called Set It Up Projects Selectors. So now in the body we have let's name some common tags we may use.
H1 through 6.
Yes, header tags, H1 through 6. Maybe
paragraph tags, body tags.
Yes, paragraph tags. We'll have some input tags if we want to form.
Yeah.
We have different types of input. We have text input, password inputs, radios, checkboxes, text area.
Boxes. Yeah.
So this is a way that we can build our HTML page, right? And so let's get into now CSS. All right, so now that we have a good understanding of what HTML is, does anyone know what CSS stands for?
Cascading style sheets.
Okay, and what is cascading?
I did know that, but it's also right there on the screen.
Yes, there's easy questions. Does anyone know what cascading means?
I know that there is a famous waterfall named the Cascade, so I'm gonna guess it means to fall.
Yeah, nice. All right, that's what it is.
Context clues there.
Using the Blue's Clues.
Why is it called falling style sheets?
Why is it called falling?
I want to take a guess at that.
Okay, let's take a guess.
Is it because like when you put it in the head and you assign it, it falls down to the text of the body? It cascades down to the code? Is that it?
That's a good guess. I'm not saying, yeah, that's a good guess. That's not wrong. You put the style tag in the head of the HTML. We'll talk about that, what that means in a second.
I mean, if you put styles below it, the bottom one precedes the top one.
Let me share a CSS file.
That's
Okay.
all I got.
I won't go too deep into what each thing that you're seeing on the CSS file, but here's a CSS file. Okay, here's an HTML file on the left, and here's a CSS file on the right. Okay. The rules on the bottom of the page are going to take priority of the rules on the top. for example, if I say I want the body to be with the background of red on up here on line 4, and then I say that same rule of the body to have a background color of blue, the rule at the bottom
It's gonna take
is going to take priority. Okay, so that's just a shortcut into what that means, cascading style sheets. Okay, so let me go ahead and do some reading now. We've worked with HTML previously to make our websites, and HTML would be something that we will continue to use. While HTML provides us a way to put our words and images into the page and determine the order and rough layout, it doesn't provide us with the way to efficiently change the style of the page. This is the job that CSS has been designed for. And as we start adding in more technologies and languages into our projects, we will often need to deal with multiple files. Okay. So now then, let's go ahead and give an example of how we would create a CSS file. We would say style.css. Yesterday, we created an HTML file and we said name it index.html. Now that we're telling you to create a CSS file, you should name it style.css. Now you can't give it whatever name you'd like, but we recommend here a standard practice is calling it style.css. Okay. So here we have an example of an HTML file. Now, if we want to link our CSS file to our HTML file, we will create this line here. Do you see this line below the title? It says link, and then rel equals style sheet. So that's telling us what this link is about. And then it has an href. The href is going to point to the name of the file that we've given it. In this case, it's style.css. Now let's go ahead and create this file alongside the instructions of our platform. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to say CSS example. And here we are. We have our Explorer. We know we're in our CSS example folder because our Explorer at the top here says CSS example. I'm going to click this button here, the new file button, to create a new file. I'm going to say index.html. So first I want to create the HTML page. I'm going to press exclamation mark, then enter. That's going to give me a boilerplate for the HTML page. I'm going to type something like hello world here. And then I'm going to change the title to CSS example. Now, if I want to view this here, I'm going to use the live server here to display what we're working with to make sure it's working just fine. I here have my title, CSS example, and then I have the hello world that I've typed in here. So, okay, we're off to a good start. Now, what it's telling us is to make a style.css file and to link it in the head. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create my CSS file. I'm going to say style.css. Now it's a CSS file is created. I have it right here now. You can see here by the blue marker, it's a CSS file. Now I'm going to then, at first, I'm going to copy and paste this link so that it can not make any mistakes here. And then I'm going to show you a shortcut. So because this href says style.css and the CSS file is in the same folder as the HTML file, we know that we are connected here. If this CSS file was in another folder and I just named it style.css, I wouldn't connect to it. It's only because it's in the same folder. And I can know this because if I click command, if I hold the command or control, and if you're on a PC and I press click, I will go to the CSS file.
So your file explorer will actually let you have multiple files named style.css as long as they're in different folders.
Yes, as long as they're in different folders. You can have multiple folders with multiple HTML files or CSS files, and as long as they're in the same folder, it's going to be linked through the name of the file in the same folder. Now I can access other folders from here, but then I would have to dig through my files here. I would have to go, I'd say something like // or /, and I can access other folders that way. But for now, let's keep things simple. Just call it style.css and put your CSS file in the same folder. And keep only one CSS and one HTML file per folder. All right. So now let's go ahead and create some stylings here. But before I do that, let me do one more thing here. I'm going to teach you a shortcut so you don't have to copy paste this or memorize this every single time. If I say link : CSS and I press enter, it'll give me that whole line for me, and it'll assume the name of the file called style.css. So if we create a file already in our folder called style.css, if we just type in link : CSS and press enter, it'll give me a link, a tag that will connect now both files. So now that we can assume it's connected, let's go ahead and create some rules on the CSS to manipulate our page. So then let's get started here. In our HTML file, I'm going to create this h1 that says hello world. Let's check that it's there. There it is. Now I want to change hello world. So I'm going to create a CSS rule here that's going to access the hello world. I know this is an h1 tag. So in order to access or target this h1 tag, I'm going to apply this rule here. I'm going to say h1 open and curly bracket. And now I'm able to do something to this h1 tag. So let's look at this, these rules given to us here. So here we have color, and then we have a color here called Rebecca Purple, and then we have a font size of 50 pixels. So let's find out what these rules do here. I'm going to add it in our h1, and let's take a look at our file now. Now we have an h1 that's bigger than it was before, and it's purple. That's because we changed the color to purple here, and we changed the font size here. Okay, now let's go ahead and play with this a little bit. What if I wanted to change it to red? I would say red. And if I wanted this to be twice the size it already is, I'm going to say 100 pixels. And that's what a red hello world with 100 pixels looks like. So let's talk about how the syntax is written. We have the rule, and then we have a colon, and then the specificity of that rule. So like color, colon, and now we have to give it whatever color we'd like. In this case, I'm just going to say red. Now, if I type this like this and check my page, it's no longer working. And the reason is I didn't add a semicolon after the end of the rule. So each rule has to have a semicolon, or none of the rules will apply. The CSS file will essentially break. Okay, so apply a semicolon after each rule. And that is how you will write proper CSS. Now let's go ahead and look here at some rules that we can apply. We have color names, we have sizes, and usually we'll set things by pixel when we are talking about size. For now, that's what we'll do. So you will get a grasp of how many pixels is for the size that you're looking for by just playing with it, really. Just adding different pixel sizes is going to help you understand, okay, this is what 200 pixels looks like for a font size. What does 20 pixels look like? Okay, 20 pixels is that small. It's a tenth of what it was. All right, so I'm going to put it back to 50. And here we are. All right, so let's continue. Now, when writing CSS, we need to be aware of the selector, the elements that we're selecting. Inside the curly brackets, the properties that we are changing from their defaults. Okay, we'll talk more about properties to learn about on the later chapter, but for now, we'll just turn our attention to the selector here. Okay, so the selector in this case is the H1. We're targeting all H1s in our HTML. So if I have another H1 here, I say H1 hello universe. That same rule is going to be applied to it. This is targeting all H1s on the page. So if I create an H2, I say hi mom or something like that. Now this is no longer this doesn't have any rules applied to it. It's just a regular H2. That's because we didn't create a CSS selector here to target that H2. Okay, if I were to change it to an H1, then it will be something else here. You'll go back to being red and 50 pixels.
What is the syntax in CSS for adding a second selector? Is it just writing it below on a new line?
Yeah, so let's do that now. I'm going to change this third one here, the hi mom rule. And I'm going to add a new selector. I'm going to say H2 color blue and font size 80 pixels. And I can write as many selectors as I need. Now let's go over that cascading part of the word cascading style sheets. If I were to let's change this back to an H1. Okay, let's take a look at our page. They're all red and they're all font size 50. We have our first selector H1 here. That's red, font size 50. And we have now an H2 that's color blue and font size 80. If I were to change this H2 to an H1, what would happen?
It would change all of them to the second rule.
Right. So now that I've said now H1 should be color blue and font size 80, the first rule no longer applies. That's because it's implied in the name, cascading. So falling from top to bottom. So the rule on the bottom is going to take priority over the one falling from the top.
Which is kind of counterintuitive to the name. You would think cascading would be the other way. But
yeah,
that would just be my mnemonic. That's just going to be my mnemonic. That
we're going to have to write a Yelp review for that.
You know, the way you're thinking about it should be. It's not that way. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
It's
So
cascading because it does the first H1 and then moves down and then applies the second H1. So the second H1 overrides the first one because it's done second.
I could use that too. That also makes sense.
That's the
Just
that's the
how do you look?
It goes through the code top to bottom. So repeated values override earlier values, just like assigning something to a variable twice. The second time you assign it, it undoes the first one.
right. Yeah, so maybe we should call it cascading JavaScript or something. That was a lame joke. Not even gonna call that a joke. All right, so let's go ahead and continue. Here we are. Now we can target any type of tag we want, any type of HTML tag. Here we can target an H1. Now we can target a P tag. We can even target the body of the whole page. So let's try and do something there. I'm going to say body. I'm going to target the background color now, and I'm going to say black. So as you can see, the page behind, now the whole thing is black. I've targeted the body. And so it's going to affect the background color of the body. The H1 tags are still blue, but the H1 tags live inside the body. So that's why their background color is black as well.
If
Okay.
you were to give a rule for the font color within the body, would it then override the heading rules?
Okay, let's go ahead and test that. So now in the body, I'm going to say color, and I'm going to say white. Answer is no. There is a way to, let's say, if I wanted to access all the H1s in the body, I would write this greater than sign here. And now I'm targeting the body's H1 tags. So now I'm saying all the H1s that live inside the body, I want them to have a background color of black and a color of white. That's going to be the font color. And it's no longer targeting the body's background color, but the H1s in the body and their background color. Yes, this is called the direct descendant selector. So all the direct descendants of that selector that I'm targeting is now going to be that. Okay, so let's do a status check now. I want to see how well we're understanding selectors right now. How to create a CSS file, how to link it to our HTML. Great. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about classes. So let's talk about how to affect the class of something. Applying a class and affecting that class. So here we have 3 blue H1 tags. And by the way, I want to see my CSS and HTML at the same time. So what I'm going to do is click this book button here and put this on the right page. So now I can see my CSS on the right, my HTML on the left. I want to affect just this third H1 tag. I want this one to be blue, but I want these two above here to be red. So what can I do here in order to target this specific one? Well, let's take a look at the platform here. We can add a class. Another way we can select a tag is by its class. In the HTML, we can add a class attribute with the name of the class we want to select. Class names cannot contain a space, spaces, and are used to separate multiple classes. All right, so let's take a look then. I'm going to give this h1 tag of Carlos says blue h1. All right, so then let's do that. We're going to say class, that's calls, class equals, and then in the quotations, I'll give the name of the class blue h1. And so now let's see how we can target it. In the CSS, we can select a class using the dot followed by the class name. So just the period here, or the dot. So let's do that now. Inside the selector here, I'm going to say dot blue h1. And now we're able to isolate and give a specific rule to the h1 class that we've called blue h1. So I've said dot blue h1, and that's how I'm able to select this blue h1 class. Let's get a status check on this as well. I want to make sure we're understanding everything. Okay, great. All right, there's another way to select something, and it's by an ID. All right, if I, for example, give this blue h1 class to more than one h1 here, let's say I give it to this Hello Universe one as well, all the classes with this name blue h1 are going to be affected by this rule. So now we have two blue h1s. And I'm going to write a fourth h1 here. I'm going to say, hi, Dad. Okay. So now I am going to delete this class. This one is now red because it's an h1. This selector is targeting all the h1s. And I'm going to now give this one an ID. So let's read what it says here. Sometimes there only needs to be one of a given element. In those cases, we can use ID as well. So only use an ID once per HTML page. So I'm going to give this one an ID of dad. And in order to target an ID, we see here in the CSS, we can learn in the CSS, we can then select an ID by using a hashtag followed by the class name. So then I'll say hashtag dad, and I'll say color green, font size 100 pixels. So now the ID has overridden the general selector here for all H1s. And it's now giving this rule. Now, if I were to copy this H1 here twice, even if I change something in here, maybe I say, hi, uncle. It has the ID of dad. You can see here that it will apply the rule to both of them. But let's copy this whole HTML page here. I'm going to go to an HTML checker. I'm going to go to this one here that we're going to use when validating your code on your test. I'm going to paste it in here. I'm going to check it. And it's going to say there's an error. Duplicate ID, dad, find on line 19. It's going to give me a warning. The first occurrence of dad was here in the hi dad, but in this hi uncle tag that has the same ID. And that's because we're only allowed to use an ID once. Okay, so it will still work, but you're going to get marked down on your test if we see that you have a bunch of errors like this. Okay. I don't get the reference. Cherry bomb. I want to ask, but I'll save it for later. All right. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. So now we have the ID selector. And we have a bunch of rules here. We'll go over what these rules mean a little bit later. But just know this is how we target an ID with the hashtag. Okay. So now here we have some HTML. Let's do a simple test here. Based on the code above, which selector would select the first div ID equals title? So let's look here, div ID equals title. Which answer here would select the div ID equals title? Three. Okay, let's go with 3. Based on the code above, which selector would select the second div class equals main? Number 2. Okay, and that's because we see a dot here. The dot selector is going to target the classes. Based on the code above, which selector would select the H1 tag? Which H1 tag? This one here, hello world. Okay, number 1, all right. Based on the code above, which selector would select all the paragraph tags? Let's get an answer here. 4. One. The answer is 1 here. All the paragraph tags, then we say P and then open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Try saying that 5 times fast. Open curly bracket, close curly bracket, open. Based on the code above, which selector would select the anchor A tag? So we have an A tag here. What does Carlos say? So we have the href, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, link, all of the above. And 5, all of the above was true. So all ways were good for number 5.
I was wondering why you would use the dot as a pretext for some of them and not on all of them.
So which one specifically?
Specifically, I guess dot main.
Dot main?
Yeah.
Because if we look here, where is it here? Class equals main. The dot is for the class.
Okay.
Yep, good question.
When you're calling a class, use the dot.
Yes, sir.
Got it.
For the last one, number 5, the third answer was bracket href bracket to call to it. What is the need for those brackets?
This here is another way to select an A tag. So the bracket here is to select the A tag by the href. So this is like an href within an A tag. So to select the href within the A tag, you use the open and close brackets there.
So if you had multiple anchor tags with different hrefs, you could specify each href with that.
This way that you see here only targets the href reference in the A tag. So thereby it selects the A tag. You're asking, can I select more than one A tag by this rule? I recommend giving this would target all of them at once. What you want to do in this case is, if you want to target more than one A tag and give them different rules, use the class selector, give them different classes.
Okay, I guess my follow-up would be then, what would be the use of using the href over the A?
It's an alternative.
Okay.
Yeah. Good questions, guys. All right, so now let's talk about the wildcard selector. This here is the wildcard selector, the multiplication sign. And we want to use this to select everything. So let's copy this rule into our CSS now. I'm going to say outline 1 pixel solid red. So that's going to give, as it's described, a solid red outline to everything on our page. So let's get a refresher of what our page looks like now. And I want to apply a red outline to everything. So now everything on our page has a red outline. The body has a red outline. Each H1 has a red outline. That's how you select everything at once. Okay. Now, what would happen if we were to have the following HTML and CSS? We have this H1 tag that has an ID of red and a class green. All right. So red is going to give the color tomato, green is going to give medium C green. So now that it has two rules that are conflicting, which one is going to take priority?
The ID red, color tomato.
ID. Because IDs take priority over classes. And that's why we only have one per page. So let's go ahead and give an example of this. I'm going to copy the class blue H1 into the same H1 that dad has. And dad says it should be green and 100 pixels. Blue H1 says it should be blue and 80 pixels. And you see it's still green. And that's because IDs take priority. Okay. Keep an eye on the chat as well, guys, that you have a lot of good supplementary information with the CISO's answers here. Okay. Now, we talked about the descendant selector. Sometimes we know the element we want to select is inside of another element. If the parent element is one we can easily select, maybe it has a class on it, then we can use this to our advantage to access the child element easily. So the descendant selector that I wrote previously had the greater than sign. This one does the same thing without that. So you can write it two ways. This is saying, I want to target the class quote. Okay, and now I want to target its descendants, all the children that are P tags. So now all the colors of the P tags are going to be dark slate gray. Let's see this in work. I'm going to copy this here. And if I right click here, I can format the document. And I'll click prettier here, so that will format my document. And I'm going to copy this P tag, add it to my CSS. And now this is, let's change it to another color so it's more visible. Orange. As you can see here now, our text is orange. That's because I said within the quote, select the P tag within the quote and make it orange. Now there's another div, there's another P tag here outside of the div, but that's not selected because that's not a child of the quote. So we said class quote, everything that's a child in there, everything that's a P tag in there, that's a child, we're going to give it these rules, italic and color.
If you wanted to do the same thing for the division below, the Chris Coyer CSStricks.com, would you class that second division as something different?
If I wanted to do the same thing below,
Yeah, so like if you wanted that division to have the same rule as .quote P,
yeah,
would you just classify that div as quote, or would you create a new one because it's a different div?
there's more than one way to do it. So you can target all the P tags on the page, and you can give them that rule, color orange, font style italic, or you can give it a specific class and target it by the class as well.
Okay.
So you can say class equals Chris. And if I say .Chris, I can copy this in here.
But like standard practice, you would classify different divs with different classes, not the same class.
It depends really on how your page is organized. Each page may be styled differently. Maybe your page, your boss is telling you, I want all the P tags to be blue on the page. Then you can just target all the P tags with the general class selector.
Okay. So just based on specificity.
Exactly. So you have more than one way to do the same thing. But if you want to specify certain things, then you give it the class selector or the ID sometimes. So yeah. All right. So now let's go ahead and continue with the direct descendant selector. As I already mentioned, this is another way to do it, adding the greater than sign similar to the descendant selector. We can select the child element with the direct descendant selector, but unlike the descendant selector, it won't select grandchildren. So this selects everything. So you can essentially, in this one, I'm going to wrap this P tag in another div. So now we have a div. Let me add some format. We have a div within a div and a P tag within this div. So if we look here, it still has an orange italic rule applied to it. If we were to apply the direct descendant, it no longer is orange and having italics. That's because this will only apply to the direct descendant. That means the immediate child. So this would be more like a grandchild of quote. But if we erase that direct descendant selector, now all the children, grandchildren included, are going to be selected by this rule. Okay, let's give a level of understanding for direct descendant versus descendant selector.
I just had a quick question. Like,
Yes.
why does the dot Chris bring it with that class? The dot Chris selector, why does it? Never mind, because you just made a different selector, right?
Yeah, I just made a different selector for this specific
Right.
class. Okay. Yes. Okay. As long as we understand the rules, we'll definitely memorize it later. So as long as we're understanding what's the difference between a direct descendant selector and a descendant selector. Let's give a 1 through 10, please. Okay. Now we also have attribute selectors. And I don't want to get too deep into this. I'm going to have to leave some reading for yourself because I want to get a big picture of everything today. So do some of this reading on your own. Selectors advanced and the selector quiz. Okay, I'll leave that to you. I'm going to go over, let's see here, how we're doing on time. Actually, we might have time for this. Yeah, we have about 10 more minutes, so let's actually do it. Here we go, here we go. A couple more selectors here. We have the wildcard, we have the attribute selector. All right, let's get into this. Sometimes we have a situation where we want to style two similar elements that rely on the attribute for how they behave. For instance, if we're making a form, we likely use input type text. Okay, for the user to input data into the input type submit, which acts as the button the user clicks to submit the form. CSS we would want to use on one, might not want to use on the other. While we could use the class to differentiate between the two, we could also use a selector that looks at the attribute. Okay, so what do we mean here? So if we say input type text, then we are selecting specifically the inputs that have this type text. There's multiple inputs on our page, but we want to say only input type text we're going to select here. And now we can target the input type submit and give it a different color, say color white, background color Rebecca purple. So we'll have multiple inputs on our page, but they're going to have specific types. This one will be text, this one will be submit. In order to grab them by their types, add the bracket after the input, and in the bracket type, the type. Type equals text. In this case, type equals submit, and they have different rules that will be applied to them. So let's go ahead and apply this. And now I'm going to grab this here. Let's take a look at what our page looks like. It's getting messy here. I'm going to undo this wildcard selector. So I'm going to just comment out the rule. Same shortcut for comments, Command/, and it will comment this rule in the CSS selector. So now it's a little bit more visible. So we have our input type text and input type submit. Here's the Rebecca with the value Rebecca, and then the type submit with the enter username. It's like a button here. All right, so now let's apply these specific rules. We're going to target all the inputs. Both of them, we want to have a padding 5 pixels. We haven't gone over what this means. Just know that we're going to apply these rules to all the inputs. But we're going to differentiate between the type text and type submit here. So then we're going to say, oops, didn't copy that, did I? Input, now both of them are going to have padding of 5 pixels. They're both going to have a border color of purple. But the type text is going to have a border of none and a border bottom of 2 pixel solid purple. So let's make this red. And this one, type submit, is going to have a color of white and a background color of, let's say, green. So here we see we're able to select multiple inputs, give them the same rule, and also differentiate between the inputs by targeting their attribute selector.
So in this example, the direct input selector is just ignored because the more specific ones are lower on the page.
No, it's still applied. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So the input, we say border color. I'm going to say 10 pixels solid Rebecca purple. It doesn't get, it's not going to be applied. So let's say padding 20 pixels. So padding is going to add some space to the inside of the div, of the section of the tag. So now both of them have a padding of 20 pixels applied to both of them. Did you see that change?
Yes, okay, so it will take like in this example, it would take the non-conflicting rules for all the
Exactly.
inputs, and then if you want to conflict with the original rule per specific one, you change
Yes.
like the border to none.
Yeah, so let's say I want to now affect the padding of input type submit. I'm going to change it to 10. And so now there's a conflicting rule. I said initially it's going to be 20 pixels of padding for all the inputs, but then as I went down the CSS file, I said now actually for input type submit, we're going to say padding is going to be 10 pixels. So it just reduced it from a general size. If I comment it out, it'll go back to that general size, 20 pixels. Now I'm going to specify with the conflicting rule here. Now it's going to be 10 pixels for the type submit.
Thank you.
Great questions, guys.
Can you make a selector that targets an attribute without targeting a tag?
A selector that targets an attribute without
Like,
targeting a tag.
What
So,
happens
like,
if you remove the word input from that last selector?
so this attribute would only be applied to an input anyways.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if I remove it, but it's just good syntax. It's good grammar here to write the whole thing.
Just to make it easier to read if someone else is looking over your code.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, now let's play, let's do a little quiz here. Let me clear it out so you guys don't see the answers. Here we go. Which selector will select all the elements on the page? 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Number one.
That's correct. Which selector has the strongest selector specificity? H1, hashtag brand, dot title, H1 dot title. Okay, everyone says 2. Which selector has the strongest selector specificity? LI, UL, LI, dot active, LI dot active. Ooh, this is more of a tricky one here. Keithan says the class selector. Mike, you're saying LI dot active. Add their strength together. Okay, so let's take a vote here. I see more 4s than 3s. So we'll find out here. Which selector will only select paragraph tags inside the div class box? One, two, three, or 4 or 5. So in the div class box, we have a p tag option, div p, p.box, .box p. We're looking for the p tags inside of the div class box. Okay, I'm seeing more 5s. Oh, 4s. Where's it getting some reinforcements here? Actually, I think there's 4 here. Everyone's saying 4. And now the last question, which selector will select all elements directly inside the div class main? We have the wildcard, and then main. We have .main, and then the wildcard .main, and then also just .main wildcard, or none of the above. Okay, I see mixed review of answers. So is it 1, 4, or 5, guys? I'm only getting feedback from Carlos here. Okay, let's see the results, and we're gonna go over the answers.
None of them really looked good to me, so that's why I didn't say.
Okay.
Because if my logic was like if the wild card is calling everything else.
Yeah, this
next-
is saying all the direct descendants of everything target all the main classes. So let's see the results, and then if we get any wrong answers, we'll go through the results here. Okay, so the first one we did get, which selector will select all the elements on the page? Easy, the wildcard. Which selector has the strongest selector specificity? The hashtag, because that's the ID. ID has the highest priority. Which selector has the strongest selector specificity? And out of all the options, it was the li.active. So all the list classes that are active. Now we need to go over 4 and 5. So let's go ahead and go over this. We said .box, p tag, and all the wildcard selectors that main. So let's go over 4. Which selector will only select paragraph tags inside the div class box?
I'm just trying to understand why it is. I think it's 5, but why div period box? Why would that go there? Because like I've used just box p type things and it's worked. I just
So here we're saying all the divs. I forgot what was the answer that we gave? That's a better question. I don't.
Box P, number 4.
So we said this one, right?
No,
We said 4.
We said 4 previously, right? So then this is the answer we're looking for. We're saying the p tags to have the class box. What about this answer? What do you guys think about this one?
That would be anything inside P that is classed as box, not anything class or inside div.
Okay. But this div has the class of box. All right, so what are we
So
gonna
you're
do?
saying you can call a different attribute that's outside of a different div? I mean, you can define two attributes in the same class if it's outside of a div, the same div.
So in this case, we are just trying to select all the paragraph tags inside this div class that has box.
And is that a specific div or is that
This is just a div with this class box. So we're going to try to access all the p tags inside this one here, class equals box. So we are going to say class box. This is the class selector, and all the p tags in the box. This is how we get all the descendants in here. So
Right.
inside.
But it's saying that one's incorrect.
Did it? I don't think it did. Did it?
It's
that's because we
incorrect
chose the
because
first one?
yeah, it's incorrect because it selects all of the every element with the class of box, not just divs. Right? Line number 4 is selecting every element with the class of box and all those p elements inside all those elements. Whereas number 5 specifically selects only the divs with the class of box.
Right. I just thought that if you have one class, there can only like that class name's taken. I didn't realize you could have multiple.
No. That's you're thinking about IDs.
Oh, okay. So there can only be one ID, but there can be multiple classes.
That's the advantage of classes, my friend.
Wow. Okay.
You can reuse them.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, that makes more sense then. I think that's what Keithan was trying to ask too.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I didn't understand the question. And I think I'm also not understanding this question. So when I read this here, I'm seeing one div class equals box. I'm not reading it all the div classes that have class, all the divs that have class box in there. So maybe this question could be a little bit clearer, but okay. And now which selector will select all elements directly inside div class main? Directly inside div class main. So let's go through each one of these are. Okay, so we have the wildcard selector, and we have the direct descendant. So we're saying all the direct descendants of the wildcard. So directly inside means, correct me if I'm wrong, so this means like the direct child, right? It's not saying
Yes.
direct descendant. So we want to use the direct descendant selector. And we're saying main, all the class mains, all the elements inside class main. So this is in reverse order. We want to select all of direct descendants of class main.
So that first one would be all of main of everything.
So all the classes that have, all the divs that have class main, that's the first step. And directly inside, all the elements directly inside, you were saying direct descendants, all the elements, that's the wildcard selector.
Mm.
So let's see the results. And these are it. I mean, if you give if you give classes, specific classes to everything you're working in, you don't have to worry about these direct descendant selectors off the bat when you're working with CSS. It's just good for you guys to know the rules. And then when you want to work with these rules, you know where to reference them on the platform. So you can come back to this later. Okay. Now let's go ahead and go over this selectors game. This will help you practice with your selectors. Okay, so now this game here, if I click the link, select the pickle on the fancy plate. So which one's the fancy plate? Well, out of all these plates here, the one that stands out is the one with the circle, because that's the one that has all out of all the plates here that have pickles. This one is the fanciest. It has a circle on it. And it has this ID of fancy, right? So we know we are trying to select this one here. So then how would we select the pickle on the fancy plate? How do we select an ID? All right, let's try Spencer's answer. We say hashtag fancy, direct descendant pickle. And then if we click enter here, and we go on to the next level. Select all the small apples now. So we have apples on plates and apples outside of the plates. So you guys can play this on your own. This is a good way to practice how to use selectors and get good at CSS. All right. Let's give 1 out of 10 of how we feel about selectors right now. Yeah, it's a lot of information. Don't worry about memorizing it all. All you need to do is know where to reference it on the platform. For now, if you want to select something, select it by its type. Select it by a class name to give it. Okay, I'd recommend just using class names for now. Anything you want to style, give it that class name, target it on CSS by that class name. Use the dot selector. All right, so we've completed this morning's lecture. At 2, we're going to go over the box model and inline block. So we'll explain what that means. Don't worry about what that means. Work on these assignments today, styling, button up, and plotting your blocks. You can access the links through the calendar. And then you go ahead and continue on reading. If you finish those assignments, read the Flex Advantage, being flexible. That'll be more towards tomorrow's topic. But we are also going to do a lab at the end of today's lecture. We're going to work in groups to do a fun activity today. And that's going to get our practice with CSS up. Okay, so we're going to have a way to practice this in groups together. So let's go ahead and end this lecture. Before we do we have any questions? Do we have any other questions that we can answer? Any doubts, comments? Okay, great. Let's go ahead and stop the recording.